Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
The Yankees look pretty good, but what else do we know about the Major League Baseball season as summer gets going? Also, Kurt Warner thinks the Dolphins should pay Tua, and a championship redefines the narrative around Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum.
I'm Peter Bukowski, starting your day with the can't-miss stories and biggest debates in sports. You're Locked On Sports Today.
Searching all major sports. Found.
Let's start with the biggest story.
The NBA season is now over. Hockey season will soon be over. And it's not NFL season for a while, which means baseball gets to take center stage. For those of you that are not baseball sickos, which, look, I understand there's a lot of you, I respect you, and I'm about to talk to him. Our pal Sully from Locked On MLB, definitely a baseball sicko. We were just talking off mic about a 1967 Red Sox story. Let's talk about a 2024 MLB story, Sully. What has been the thing so far this season as we head toward the All-Star break that has been most surprising to you?
The logjam in the National League. There's only two teams in the National League that are out of it as we're in late June, and that's the Rockies and the Marlins. Oddly, the Marlins were a playoff team last year. But as we're recording this, there are the fifth and sixth wildcard spots. There are 9 teams within a game and a half for 2 spots. And many of those teams are sub 500 and yet are only a game and a half out of the playoffs. So what it's going to mean is if you have any tradable assets, call all of those teams and you will get something. I think it's great for baseball that you even have some teams that are decidedly mediocre, and yet there's a reason to go to the ballpark. And not yet. And we've seen, by the way, say, who cares? You get the last wild card spot. Well, the last wild card spot last year went to the World Series. And do you know when the last time that happened? The year before. So the last 2 years, the 6th spot in the wild card represented the National League in the World Series. So if you're Washington, San Diego, Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Chicago, the Mets, the San Francisco, you can't. I've been saying the Mets should be sellers because it's such a seller market and they have some pieces that, hey, take advantage of this. And Met fans have been crucifying me because as of this recording, the Mets are only half a game out. And I get it, but I also think there's an opportunity to shed some bad contracts and move forward. But that being said, the fact that that's been the most shocking. And the other thing is how good Cleveland's been. Cleveland, I thought they were going to be fringe contenders, but I thought Minnesota was the best team in the division. Cleveland's been by far the best team in the division. And Kansas City, by the way, was a 100-loss team this year. It has a winning record. And I think that's a big turnaround. But I think Cleveland and how good the Yankees have been, especially Garrett Cole hasn't pitched until this Wednesday. And the pitching has been their biggest story. Now we're going to see how hurt Judge is. But I thought the Yankees were not as bad as they were last year. And I didn't think they were as good as they were when they won 99 games. I thought they were somewhere in the middle. And this team, I don't think they're going to be a 100-win team, but I definitely think they're a 90-some-odd win team. But I say Cleveland, how the Yankees have improved, the rise of Kansas City, and the absolute logjam in the National League are the most surprising things.
I thought at some point in all of those, you might mention the team leading the National League Central.
Oh, yeah, the Brewers. Yeah, I mean, it's funny we talk about it as a surprise. You mean the defending Central champion Milwaukee Brewers, who have won 2 out of the last 3 years.
Who turned over major pieces of their roster, lost their manager, and
their ace and everything like that. And I think that's more. And and I admire the fact that the Brewers have responded. They have pitched well. They have hit well. There's been a renaissance with Yelich. I think it's also an indictment of how bad Chicago's been. I think it's an indictment that St. Louis hasn't been able to get out. I mean, St. Louis is playing better, but there's no one in that division. And I think it's a similar I think it's similar things happening in the West, the AL West, where Seattle has a 10-game lead over Houston and Texas.
Right.
I think that it's a sense that I think Milwaukee's playing. I think they're a good team, but I also think they're being helped by the fact that some of the other teams that the Cubs are supposed to be very good this year, and their wheels have been spinning. Their bullpen has been grotesque. I mean, they've asked me to be a pitcher for at least not to close, but to sort of, middle innings.
Middle relief. Yeah, that makes sense.
They're watching the film Rookie of the Year and thinking, how accurate is that film? Is there a Henry Rowengartner out there that we can sign at this point? But yeah, I think
they might need Angels in the outfield at this point.
Well, don't bring up the Angels because they're holy Toledo. That's a disaster happening in Anaheim. But yeah, Milwaukee. Yes, Milwaukee being in first place and quite comfortably, mind you, is interesting. There are 4 very good teams in the National League right now: Philadelphia, Atlanta, Milwaukee, and Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And everything else, and then you have 2 bad teams, which are Colorado and Miami, and everyone else is identical. Absolutely identical.
So given all of that, do we expect that impacts the trade deadline? Because usually you need a lot of sellers. If everyone thinks, hey, we're in this, like you're not, if you're the Reds and you're sitting at the bottom of the NL Central, you're like, wait, but we have a chance.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to affect it if you are a team. And I think there are some teams that have to do some real soul searching. I think Tampa Bay has to take a good long look in the mirror. They're a team that won 99 games last year. They're a playoff regular. They've not been able to get out of their own way. Toronto, I think I do not understand. No one's been able to explain to me why they haven't made a managerial change. I thought this is a year and a half. You had the bungled playoff against Seattle a couple of years ago. They still kept the manager. They bungled the playoffs last year against Minnesota. And instead of at least giving a chance and giving someone a shot, they're like, oh, maybe we're going to have to trade this player. We're going to trade. You're going to break this team up, which should be a pennant contender, instead of, I'm not saying it's all Schneider's fault, but I am saying that something has to change. And before you give up, give it a shot. But, if they're not going to, then they are going to wind up trading Vlad Guerrero or Kikuchi or someone like that. But for what, for what purpose? The White Sox are going to trade everything that isn't nailed down. The Angels are going to trade everything that isn't nailed down. And Oakland, oddly, has 2 of the most interesting trade chips in Miller and Vlade. And I think that's going to be interesting.
Stay up to date all year on the major leagues by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On MLB on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Thanks for making Locked On Sports Today your first listen. Coming up, Kurt Warner thinks the Dolphins need to keep Tua Tagovailoa for as long as they can. Before we get to that, the Pistons are moving on at head coach. Game Time makes getting to the ballpark even faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, and their best price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. They're obsessed with finding ways to help you save money on tickets. Game Time has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event and even an hour after it starts. It's the place to find last-minute seats. Find exclusive flash deals and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the free app, and new users can get $20 off their first purchase with code Locked On. Terms apply. That's code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, the lowest price guaranteed. And if you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. The Detroit Pistons decided they had seen all they needed to see of Monty Williams and relieved him of duty after just one season. They still owe him $65 million, though.
And what did the report say? According to Woj, according to James Edwards, according to all these guys, Tom, this was an ownership decision. This was an ownership decision. Tom stepped in. Now, this doesn't mean that Trajan didn't want it to happen. This doesn't mean that Trajan didn't like this. It didn't mean that he went over Trajan's head and forced him to do something he didn't want to do. It's more so, I would say, the way I would describe it as, I would more so say that Tom made sure it happened And Trajan was just like, yeah, if it happens, cool. Like, if that's the route we go, I'm cool with that. I'll go get one of my guys. Like, that's how I would phrase it. I know there's some people already tweeting me and asking me and commenting and DMing me. I've been getting it ever since the news ended, asking, hey, does this mean that Tom just like completely went over Trajan and said, no, that's not what happened behind the scenes. I would not characterize it as that at all. I think Trajan was on board with this. He was just more so from the way I feel about it. I think he was more so just indifferent about the whole process, whereas Tom kind of made it happen, which is what the reports are saying and kind of what I understand as well.
If Locked On or literally anyone else wants to pay me $65 million to not work for them, my DMs are open. Bronny James has only worked out with 2 teams during his pre-draft process, but his agent denies that this is any different from any other draft prospect. James has worked out for the LA Lakers and the Phoenix Suns. That's it. The Lakers have the 17th and 55th picks, while the Suns have the 22nd pick. When asked about the specificity, let's call it, agent Rich Paul told ESPN, the goal is to find a team that values your guy and try to push him to get there. It's important to understand the context and realize that this has always been the strategy with many of my clients through the years, especially those in need of development, like Bronny. My stuff is by design. Paul also said of the idea that LeBron just wants to play with his son, they are off that idea. On the diamond, the Twins had a shot at their 7th win in a row.
They dropped to 41-33 on the year. Let's talk Joe Ryan here in a second. But first, as always, just kind of biggest takeaways, your 8 topics from game 2 versus Tampa.
It was a gettable one, just slipped away. Error late by Lewis. I mean, that'll kind of be the defining play of this game, going in front of Correa to try and get that ground ball. I think it was the right play by Lewis. He's just gotta make the throw look like he rushed it coming up the line, and that's one that's going to come back to haunt him in this game. But I mean, when you look at it, the Twins had their chances. They left so many guys on base. I don't have the number in front of me, but they just left a ton of guys on base. It felt like there was just a lot for them to be had throughout the game, and it didn't necessarily need to come down this late to extras. But overall, Royce Lewis is kind of going to get the blame or a lot of the talking points of why they lost this game. But the Twins had a lot more opportunities throughout the game to really put this one away and just never quite were able to.
The Dolphins have a decision to make about their quarterback's future. Hall of Fame quarterback Kurt Warner thinks it's an easy decision, as he tells Locked On Dolphins host Kyle Krabs.
Kurt also said some nice things about Tua Tagovailoa recently on the internet and made him the latest in this debate that we're seemed to be doomed to endure on a daily basis for the rest of the time, which brings us here today on Locked On Dolphins. Kurt, thanks so much for taking some time out of your day and joining me here on Locked On Dolphins.
You got it. Good to be on with you.
So I wanted to give you the opportunity first and foremost for anybody who's not familiar with kind of where you stand on Tua Tagovailoa as a player, to kind of get them up to speed as far as how you view him overall as a player now that we're 4 years into his NFL career, as the Dolphins kind of on this decision on whether or not to pay him.
Yeah, when I watch tape on all the quarterbacks in the NFL, I break them down as a whole, trying to look at all the different things that they do, the things that they do really, really well, maybe the things they do well that's different than what other guys do. And then you try to, and I don't even really want to say rank them, more importantly for me, I try to assess or analyze who they are as a quarterback, what they do well, where they need to improve if they want to become great. So the thing about Tua is he's been really good the last couple years. I'm not putting him in that great category, but I always like to preface that with there's only a few of those guys at any given time in the NFL, any era where you say, this guy is, one of the greats. This guy, to me, I talk about franchise quarterbacks a lot. And to me, a franchise quarterback is a guy that you believe if nothing else happened on the offense, that you could put the ball in that quarterback's hands 40, 45 times, and he could give you a chance to win every time out. So there's only a handful of those guys. But there are some things that I believe Tua is elite at. Maybe does better than anybody in the National Football League. And those things are his ability to anticipate, get the ball out quick, and he's got great accuracy in doing that. And so that to me is where he separates himself, where, you've seen this offense be one of the best offenses in the league for the last couple of years. And it primarily stems from those skills of Tua connected with Coach McDaniel's offense and what they're trying to do, and they fit perfectly together. And so that's where he excels. That's where this offense excels. And you watch them week in and week out. They want to try to do the same sort of things every week. And when they're allowed to do that, they are tough to stop. Coach Tua, and then obviously the incredible weapons they have, starting with Tyreek Hill, to be explosive. For me, where Tua needs to get better and where this offense needs to get better is when option number one isn't there. Designing plays that give Tua, a full gamut of things. If the defense takes this away, then this should be open or this should be open. So I think they need to improve scheme-wise in that regard. And then Tua, his ability to go beyond number one. They've been so good offensively at getting to that number one option. And with Tua's strengths, you could look at the tape sometimes and go, man, he's forcing that a little bit. He's forcing that throw, but he gets away with it a lot because of that anticipation and that accuracy. But where it comes to haunt you is when that guy really isn't open, when there really is no option to throw it and we're trying to force it in there, or we get stuck on that option too long and then we're not able to progress through that and get the ball to our secondary and our third receiver. And that to me is where they have struggled, especially against good teams, right? Good teams are going to take away what you do best and they're going to force you to win away from your strength. And that to me is what Tua and this Miami Dolphins have to prove to the league, is that when you take that away, we can still win in big moments against good teams.
Stay up to date all year on the Miami Dolphins by subscribing to Locked On Sports Today and Locked On Dolphins on your favorite podcast app and on YouTube. Coming up, a title changes the narrative around Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Titles change everything, and Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum are no different, as Locked On NBA host John Corrales and Jake Madison discuss.
The one thing about Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum is this run, this championship redefines the struggles that they've had as the adversity they had to overcome on their way to a championship versus what had been seen as failures.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a results-oriented business. It's a rings culture, right? That's what defines you more than anything. Your challenges, your struggles, none of that matters. Just win the title, and then the narrative immediately changes. You've seen this for other people, right? Like, we talked about this a lot with the MVP discussion with Jokic. Voters weren't going to give him 3 in a row till he won the finals. He won the finals, and now he can win as many as he wants in a row, right? I immediately said after this that I think you're going to see Jrue Holiday win Defensive Player of the Year next year if he has a good, his normal defensive year, because now he's a 2-time champion, and you just look at him differently, right?
Yeah.
Tatum, Brown, you said it perfectly. Those aren't failures. Those were adversity, struggles to overcome, lessons to be learned. That's only because they won. It's only because they won, right? And that's the luxury of winning. It changes the past and it makes it look different. Think about how Kyrie Irving would be looked at differently had he won this title. We'll get into Luka Doncic in the next segment. Right now, it's what lessons can he learn to overcome his failures, right? Because that's what it is right now. This is the luxury you get when you win games, fair or unfair. But it's a rings culture. It's a title culture. And that's what those two just kind of set this down. We've talked about it on the show, right? Like, this was a team that, had a lot of calls to break it up. Maybe they needed to do that, if they didn't win this one too. But now that they do, run it all back next year.
Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum to this point have been defined by what could be and what could not be, or what people thought could not be. Could they work together? Could Jaylen Brown and Jayson Tatum coexist on a championship team? The evidence to this point is no. And in a lot of ways, at least narratively speaking from the outside, they have been defined by this paradox that they have won so much together and yet fallen short, that it has raised the question, can they win together at the highest level? Now, I think in retrospect, it's easy to say, because they've won, that was a silly conversation to be having. But only because they've won. They were defined by this question. Yes, they're good, but do they complement each other enough to win a championship? The answer is now unequivocally yes. And so now the question is, how are they going to be defined? We know they are good enough together to win a title. That's obvious. They won a title. If you want to ask a question, and maybe there's no other questions, maybe this is a true any other questions kind of situation. Now, this is sports and sports media, so we're still going to get questions, of course. Who is the true number one on this team? Doesn't matter. Those are all questions that someone like John Corrales on Locked On Celtics can tackle day in and day out, and will be tackled on Sports Talk Radio in Boston and the national media everywhere. But the question that has dogged this team, can the Jays win a title? That has defined the last 5 years of Boston Celtics basketball. That era, that question is over. And finally, Charlie Woods, the 15-year-old son of Tiger Woods, earned his way into the first USGA championship on Wednesday. He had the leading score among qualifiers for the U.S. Junior Amateur next month at Oakland Hills. This is tough. Who has more pressure on them to be great than the son of the greatest golfer the world has ever known? But he's really, really good. So good luck, Charlie. We'd love to see it. If you're catching this episode after hearing your favorite Locked On show, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts so you never miss an episode. Also, if you're a new subscriber to Lost, we're here for you with the biggest stories in sports every day. Coming up on the next Locked On Sports Today, will the Lakers just hire JJ Redick already? So at least until tomorrow, stay locked on sports today.
Locked On Podcast Network presents Locked On Sports Today.
For more episodes of Locked On Sports Today, go to our video on demand. Click on sports at the top of your screen. There, you'll find past episodes of Locked On Sports Today, plus other Locked On shows on demand.